Let's bring in one of the 17 Republicans who did vote to advance this bill, North Dakota Senator Kevin Cramer. Senator, thanks for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, so you were not a part of that G10 negotiation group, but as I just mentioned, you did vote to push through this procedural vote last night to advance the $1.2 trillion infrastructure package. As you just heard, your colleague, Senator Tim Scott, he said there's not enough information, there's not enough legislation for me to vote. So what convinced you to push this forward?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. First of all, I happen to be the ranking member of the Environment and Public Works Subcommittee on Transportation and Infrastructure, and we passed a bill unanimously out of committee to fund and advance transportation infrastructure, which, the traditional stuff. I'm very familiar with that language. That language is exactly what's in this other bill, the new bill, simply adding on top of the base that we passed. Same with water. Same committee passed a bill on water that became part of the baseline for this one. And so I've seen a lot of text. I haven't seen, obviously, the every bit of it to this point, but I've seen enough to know that the things that I care the most about are protected. Things like permitting reform, codifying the Trump rule on one federal decision, which was a really big deal. In fact, when President Trump issued that order, the first thing on the very first day that Joe Biden became president, he repealed that order. We were able to get it in for highway infrastructure into this bill. A really big deal. Maintaining the funding formula for rural America, making sure that states get the grants, not pet projects get the grants. Things like that are really foundational were preserved. And so I was comfortable enough to vote on cloture to proceed to the measure. So that's several steps before actually even offering up amendments and voting for final passage. But I felt like we should get on this bill, start describing it, explaining it, and let more of our colleagues see it. Now, Senator Scott, who's got every right to do what he did, and he's got good rationale for doing it, for voting no until he sees bill text. But I'm confident when he sees the text that will reflect the things that we know are in the bill, he'll get more comfortable with it as well.
Senator Cramer, you brought up how far this bill still has to go. Obviously, pay for his amendments, all that's got to go. Then it's going to go to the House if it passes, where Nancy Pelosi has already said she's not going to take it up unless she gets the $3.5 trillion bill. But let's just fast forward. Let's say that it does go down there, it gets passed, it comes back, and whether that's in conference or not, what could poison this bill for you?
Yeah, that's a really important point because it's not done, right? And so, for example, one thing that would be really a problem for me and probably poison it would be if they returned back to that exorbitant number that would mess up the formula for transit versus traditional infrastructure. The tradition for years has been roughly 83% infrastructure, 70% transit. They wanted to go to a much larger number than that. That's what Susan Collins fought for just the other night until midnight. She prevailed. If they pulled out these permitting reforms like the one federal decision or the some of the other NEPA reforms that we were able to get in, that would be a deal killer for me. If they messed up the 90-10 formula for distribution of transportation funds, that could very well hurt a rural state like North Dakota, where the miles of road are more important than the numbers of people that drive on them, because we've got to get that farm to market interstate system working. So those would be some things that would be deal killers for me, but they were all things that I insisted on before I agreed to vote for moving ahead.
Senator, there are a lot of Republicans out there, including Trump. I just read a statement from him sounding the alarm, saying that voting for this $1.2 trillion bill only paves the way for Democrats to push through their $3.5 trillion social infrastructure budget reconciliation, meaning they don't need Republicans at all. What's your response to people who would say that Democrats are just using you?
Yeah, I understand that, but here's what I would say. I actually think it's just the opposite. I think by taking the things that are largely popular among both Republicans and Democrats in this country, and certainly infrastructure is one of those things. Sure, does Joe Biden get a little victory out of it? Sure he does, but this one doesn't require a loser. But by taking that out, we make their other package much less attractive. Moderate Democrats are going to have a much harder time voting for a human infrastructure package or a social welfare package when it's absent, the low-hanging fruit of an infrastructure package, which has as its primary purpose the profitability of our economy. It invests in the supply side of the economy, which pushes against inflation. There are a lot of things to like about infrastructure, and we've certainly learned how important infrastructure. You can't have a growing economy without a solid infrastructure, not just roads and bridges, waterways, but also broadband, pipelines, transmission lines, airports, and rail. So I actually think that strategically, politically speaking, this makes it more difficult for them to pass the big package. And if we hadn't done that, if we end up not passing this, they're going to lump this plus more into the $3.5 trillion, and they're going to pay for it with massive tax increases, and you're going to see all of the permitting reforms taken out. So sausage making can sometimes be ugly, but in a 50-50 Senate, I think we've done about as well as we can do, and I think there's it's on balance much more good in it than there is bad.
Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema says that the price tag is just too high for that $3.5 trillion human infrastructure bill, and she won't vote for it. So, she's getting a lot of pressure, a lot of heat today, specifically from some of her colleagues, trying to get her to change her mind. What do you think? Do you think she'll stand her ground?
Well, I know Kyrsten pretty well. I served with her in the House for 6 years. We were classmates. I don't think she ever voted for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House. She is fiercely independent. And more importantly, Seth, and I think this is what a lot of people miss about people like Kyrsten and even Joe Manchin, what they are is a reflection of the people they work for. I mean, she took a seat that's been Republican for a very long time. That doesn't mean it turned bright blue in Arizona. It just means that she's a pragmatist. So I think her conviction is real. I take her at her word. And what I would say, besides taking a lot of heat, she's got a lot of leverage. So, there's a lot of room to give in a $3.5 trillion price tag, shall we say.
Senator, I do want to get your take on this because I was sad to see it. Progressive Democrat across the aisle in the House, Cori Bush, she's pointing out a race issue because this negotiating group was actually all white. And saying this is a bipartisan infrastructure group, or is it an audience at a Kid Rock concert? And then goes on to say, negotiation so white. Why is she trying to make this about race? Is this a race issue, this infrastructure deal?
Well, it certainly is not a race issue, and I just don't even relate to it. When I see something like that, I wonder what is going on in this person's head. All I can say is, politically speaking, it's the gift that keeps on giving, because this is not where America is. This is not where the vast majority of America is, where everything has to be divided by color of skin or other, other divisions. Identity politics is counterproductive. Maybe it works in certain congressional districts. I don't think it works very well on a large scale. And I frankly think it's why Democrats are probably embracing themselves for a really tough 2022.
Well, Senator, appreciate your time here tonight. We'll have to check back in with you, see how this thing goes once it goes to the House. And again, appreciate your time.
My pleasure. We still have a long way to go in the Senate as well, so happy to check in. Always appreciate the opportunity.